Guys, welcome to 180 Drums. I've got my man 180 Dave sitting in on this lesson. 180 Dave!
Look, this is how it feels to get punched!
That's right. I've never sat in this seat and had a guest here, so we're really excited that we get to kind of just interact a little bit now. We get to hang out with you guys. Because Dave is not just someone who's at 180, he's also one of my best dudes, man. He's a good friend. So today what we're uncovering is we're just going to really cover the basics of understanding reading, understanding the drum set, what it looks like written out, right? Because I feel like a lot of people think it's really confusing, and it really isn't. It's really not meant to be that challenging or tough. So we're going to break it down for you guys, and we're going to start one drum at a time, explain it, take a minute to familiarize ourselves, even with the names of the drums. So, you know, maybe to some people, they're like, I already know the names of all the drums. It's like, just hang tight. We're going to cover it all, and we'll make sure that it's at a good pace so that the intermediate drummer who's just here to learn the notation can keep up as much as the beginner guy that's like, you know, this is easy. I've got this. This is easy. Okay, so starting with the snare drum. So first of all, what I would love is if you guys were sitting at your drum kit while doing this, it'll be really good because we're going to really help tie our visual and our kinesthetic and our auditory, all of our senses. We're going to tie all that stuff to the learning experience so that while you guys are hearing me talk about the snare drum, seeing where it appears on the staff, you're hitting the drum, you're beginning to read right away because it's super simple, guys. So first of all, we got the snare drum.
Why do they call it a snare drum, Jake?
Oh, great question. We didn't rehearse that. That was great.
That was awesome.
That was so good. Okay, check it out. Here's why it's called the snare drum. Really simple. We've got snares on the bottom. Voila. So you hear that? You hear that like hissing sound?
The ringing, yeah.
That's these guys. Boom. See
Those are called
those?
snares.
Those are called snares. And what happens is when I hit the top, or in this case now it's the bottom head, but when I hit that, I'm sending a shock wave, right, through the top head, and then that impact is pushing air to the bottom head, and it's vibrating those wires that we call snares. All right, guys? So that's why it's called the snare drum. And if I turn that off, you get this sound. Sounds like a tom, baby.
Like a Bob Marley album.
Like a Bob Marley? Okay. Goofy. All right, so that's our snare drum. Now, the snare drum. All right, here's all you guys need to know. First of all, drums appear on the staff as note heads. All right, so they appear as circles, the dark filled in circles in most instances. All right, and cymbals, anything brass or anything, even a note like this, any really sharp notes appear on the staff like X's. All right, so our cymbals are going to look like X's, and our drums, the note heads themselves, are going to look like circles. It's going to be a lot more easy to identify that once you know drums look like circles, cymbals look like X's.
X's and O's, baby.
X's and O's,
It's all about the love, guys.
Boom. 180 Dave to the rescue. All right, so snare drum. It's going to appear on C on the treble clef, but we actually use the percussion clef just to make it easy. I'll identify the notes, and you guys will have the visual to follow along, all right? So this appears as C. So why don't you hit your snare drum and take a look at the note on the screen. So, boom, super easy. That's our snare drum note, all right? Now, one thing to note too is that the snare drum can have an accented note. An accented note of the snare drum looks like this, while a ghost note on the snare drum looks like this. So you can hear the sound is directly related to the way the note's going to appear, right? It's super cohesive. So that's one thing to understand right away. And then a cross stick on the snare drum would look like this. All right, pretty basic, but super helpful to see all that stuff. And most transcriptions, when you're reading or learning drum music, they have a legend up top that's going to cover anything you're going to need to know. So now you guys understand how to reference that and use the legend as well. So legends look like that. Got it. All right, now let's move on to the bass drum, because that's kind of like the second most frequently thing, right? Is that we're hitting the bass drum.
Yeah,
non-stop. Non-stop. All right, so the bass drum's going to appear on the staff as F. Bass drum sounds and looks like this. Now, typically for the bass drum, we could add an accent, which just means we'd be hitting the bass drum louder, or we could even add a ghost note to the bass drum and just be hitting it quieter. But the most common thing you're going to see, like really when it comes to the bass drum, it's usually just notated as like one single hit. So it's pretty simple. It's nothing too crazy. We'll keep moving forward and go to the tom now. So sometimes we have two toms. If we have two toms, all that's going to happen is the first tom is going to take the position of E on the staff, which is the very top space of the staff. And then if we had a second tom, it would go just underneath that on the next line down. So this is what the tom looks and sounds like on the staff when you have one rack tom. I think sounds good, man. Sounds good.
Not too shabby.
All right, so that's the tom, and again, we can add an accent to that, which just means we're hitting it harder, or a ghost note. So accent, ghost note. Typically, man, I think toms sound best when you're really leaning into them because they kind of cut through. Quieter notes on toms sometimes get lost because the drums aren't always as tight as the snare drum, so you don't have that same articulation. Now, when it comes to the floor tom is the space above the bass drum, which is A. It looks like this. Thunder. Floor tom is complete thunder, baby.
Thunder.
Thunder. All right, so that's it, guys. Those are the drums so far. And again, like there's little things like there's accents, there's ghost notes, there's little stuff like that. But for the most part, that is pretty much everything you guys are truly going to see, especially with what we're notating. That's what you guys are going to encounter on the drums. And rims would be the same deal. If I was trying to hit a rim on a tom, I'd probably notate that in the exact same spot as the tom, just with an X instead, to show that it's a little bit more brass sounding, a little bit higher pitch. Make sense? Makes sense so far? Yeah?
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
Awesome. Okay. So, and again, we haven't covered any types of notes yet. Like, we're not even talking about quarter notes, eighth notes. We're just showing you guys the note themselves and where they kind of land. And, it's notated as a quarter note, but that's the idea. We've got the drums down. So now when it comes to the cymbals.
And in all of the music that you'll get with all the 180 lessons, you have a legend at the very top, right? So you'll be able
Got a legend, baby.
So you'll know what's up on every lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're never going to leave you guys hanging, so you can always reference the legend, and everything that we're playing in a lesson is listed in the legend. So it makes it totally easy to follow along.
Makes it way easier.
All right. Now we get the hi-hat. Now the hi-hat's cool because we got a lot of different sounds. So not only do we have the basic generic hi-hat sound, all right? And again, while I'm hitting these guys, like, it might seem overly simplified, but I want you to actually hit the hi-hat and look at the note, because what's going to happen is your brain's going to begin to draw that parallel, right? Like, if you're just seeing the note in the most basic form, like, there is the hi-hat note and you're hitting it, you're going to familiarize yourself, right? So the hi-hat appears on G, which is directly the space above the last line at the top of the staff. That's where the hi-hat appears, and it appears as an X, all right? So that's the hi-hat. Now, like I said, the hi-hat's got a lot of options.
It does.
So we've got the basic hi-hat hit. We've got more of an accented hi-hat hit. We've got the bell of the hi-hat. We've got the open note of the hi-hat. And then that sound when I shut it is also another sound, and that looks like this. We call that the chick of the hi-hat. And there's one more. There's actually one more.
And there's different notes for all of them.
All of them. They all have different notes.
Wow.
Totally. And then there's the splash of the hi-hat. And again, so like a lot of drummers don't factor in the chick sound. But like, let me give you a really simple demonstration of the chick sound. So. Come on, right? It's got its own sound, and our sticks were even vibrating in there a little bit and give it the cowbell sound. You know, the... And since I hit that, if this was a cowbell's also got a note. You could put that in a few different spots. Typically, you'd put it where the hi-hat is, and you'd identify it as a triangle or something that really stands out, and that would look like this.
Very cool, man.
Boom! All right, so that's the hi-hat. There's a lot for the hi-hat, but typically what you're going to see most often is going to be just the unaccented note, the accented note, the open hi-hat note, and then the chick sound. Because a lot of times, too, we're using that chick in independence lessons where we're using our left foot, where we're doing stuff like... using that left foot to keep time and to really just kind of drive home stuff. A lot of drummers are using that, and that does have to get notated, right? Because everything we play on the drums, we have to be able to write it down. Otherwise, like, stuff just gets lost, man.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
All right, so that's the hi-hats, and I'm going to jump over to the ride cymbal, because the ride cymbal, the hi-hat and ride are unique from the rest of the cymbals because they're a big part of us keeping time. So, the hi-hats, we use them in grooves all the time. Crash cymbals are more accents. The ride cymbal is another one that we use to keep time, right?
Yes.
So the ride cymbal, now it can be written a number of different ways. The way I like to typically see it written out the most, and these can vary. So when I say the hi-hat takes the top space just above the top line, I usually like to write the ride on the very top line. The reason I say I like to write it is because, man, I have seen some super famous textbooks write it both ways. So I've been following books where sometimes they'll put the hi-hat on that top line and they'll put the ride just above that, on the space above it.
All right.
Whereas I like to do the other way around. I like to keep the ride cymbal on that top line, right? So again, that's F, I believe, if I got my
Yes,
notation
correct.
right. So, and that's where I typically like to put the ride cymbal the most. To see it on F, see it on that top space, and we've got a number of different sounds with the ride cymbal as well. So here is the basic ride cymbal note, the way it'll appear on the staff. Now, you can get so many sounds out of the ride cymbal that we don't notate all of them. We don't go like ride cymbal note 1, ride cymbal note 2, because if I just move around a cymbal, it's the same with the hi-hats. Even though we had a lot of different options, I can still get so many different sounds out of the hi-hat, right? One thing we didn't even discuss that can also be notated as well is a slightly sloshy hi-hat sound. Not fully open, not fully closed, but more of this.
A lot of rock beats with that, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's not fully open though, right? So that needs to be notated at least to give the viewer or the person reading the music a little bit of a better idea. So the ride cymbal is the same way, man, because I can crash a ride cymbal, which, to be honest, at that point, I usually just write that note out as a crash because I'm trying to identify a crash. It doesn't matter if I hit that crash sound on the ride or the cymbals. It's kind of generic that way when stuff gets written out.
Yeah.
People aren't like writing you have to crash the ride cymbal for that. It's
Right.
usually just written as a crash.
So a lot of this is up to interpretation, up to each drummer.
As specific as it's attempted to be, it's
Yes.
still totally up to interpretation.
Cool.
To some extent, right? Like, we've got some basic understanding of what a rim shot is for sure, what a ghost note is for sure. But when it comes to, like, accenting stuff, it's not telling you exactly how hard to hit something. We do get things like forte, right? Which lets you know that the music's loud, but that doesn't give you an indication of dynamic level, right?
Yeah.
So that's the ride cymbal bow. And then again, if I was going to crash it, I would notate that as a crash, which we'll get into that in a second. And then there is the bell sound. So really with the ride cymbal, the most common thing you see is the bow sound and the bell sound. So here's what the bell sounds like. Poor 180 Dave. Poor 180 Dave with no earplugs. Were you ready for that?
I think that's Stanley Randolph's favorite part of the whole kit is that bell right there.
Dude,
man.
he plays it so well,
he
man.
loves that bell.
Stan is the man. Stan's the man. Yeah, and the bell. Yeah, that's a great point actually. Like stylistically, I mean, you hear the bell in a lot of Van Halen, where it's like rocket just straight on the bell.
Yeah.
And then you also hear the bell in a lot of funk stuff, where it's like ding, 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 where they're accenting between the bell and the bow of the cymbal, right?
Yeah.
In jazz, you're mostly hearing the sound of the bow of the cymbal. That's why they even make some jazz cymbals that have no bell, because it's just like pure bow, right? Ting, 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 ting. So that's what we got going on with the ride. Now, if I go to the crashes are notated as such. All right, crash 1 can appear on the staff like that, or crash 2. And then, as I mentioned, you can use the ride cymbal for the same thing. So you can just kind of pick a spot to use the ride cymbal because it's just a crash sound.
Those K's are sweet, man.
Dude, these are amazing cymbals,
Sound
man.
good.
That's the light ride. So yeah, for anybody interested right now, because this is a really great sounding cymbal setup. Like all these cymbals mesh together really nicely. We're using all K's, so naturally when you use cymbals in a line from any company, you're gonna get some cohesiveness. Hopefully, if they're a good company, Zildjian makes fantastic cymbals. So we're using the light hats 15-inch with the K light 22-inch ride. So those two cymbals together sound lovely. right?
How sweet it is.
Dude, they sound super nice. Okay, so we got that happening with the hats and then the ride. And then for the crash, we've got an 18-inch dark medium thin crash, and then we went 19. So these sound great, even though they're only an inch apart, which to some people might seem weird, because sometimes you like to have a bigger spread. Like if you're going to use a 19, you'd want to use maybe a 17 to just make sure that they sound different. These two sound really great together, though. So again, the 18-inch medium thin dark crash by Zildjian, the K, and then a K dark crash medium thin 19-inch on the other side. And those sound like this together. What I love, man, that's super consistent is that you can hear, even like just seeing that on the staff again, like guys, practice along. Just give each cymbal a hit if you have to. If you don't, hit your ride cymbal, hit your crash, just to begin practicing identifying. But what I love is that you can hear the notes, right? It sounds like a nice interval between the cymbals, so that's what we're going for. And then check it out with the ride cymbal too. Come on, right?
Very cool, man.
You hear it? You hear how they're like they sound like an even interval apart from one another.
Yeah.
So it makes your whole drum set sound cohesive. So I think that matters with cymbals a ton. Like you want to have that matters. I just said
It
matters.
matters. He's making up words.
All right, so let me play one quick groove where I'm going to play a really simple groove, and I want you guys to just kind of follow along. If you don't know how to play the drums yet and this is your first lesson, this is an awesome place to start because you're getting to meet Dave and I. You're hanging out with us. It's a good hang. But most importantly, too, is you're beginning to be able to identify the drums and where they appear on the staff, all right? So here's a super basic groove, nothing crazy at all, but I want you guys to follow along and notice where the notes appear. All right? That's a bunch of notes that you guys got to see. You got to see some ghost notes. You got to see accents on the snare, not just snare drum notes, accents. You got to see the bass drum, the hi-hat, some hi-hat accents with that upbeat sound. And like that's a lot of information at once. I'm not expecting you guys to be able to play that for a while, but I wanted to just really intro each instrument and seeing what it looks like on the staff and then also hearing it, right? So that's a really good starting place. And I'll do one more. I'll do one more that's kind of like a funk groove. I'll play on the ride cymbal. I'll use the bell of the ride cymbal. I'll use the bow of the ride cymbal and go back and forth. And then I'll keep time with my left foot and even introduce some splash stuff so you guys can kind of see all that at once. So. All right, giving you guys a little taste of all the drums. What do you think, dude? Any questions,
awesome,
man?
No, just to encourage you guys. This is something Jake's been doing for a very long time, right? We're just starting out, just learning. This takes practice.
We're talking about practice.
We're talking about practice. So take your time, start from the beginning, start with the building blocks.
Yeah.
From the very beginning. And
Dave,
practice,
Dave couldn't be more right. Like, it takes a long time. And at the same time, like today, all we're discussing, all you guys have to focus on is just beginning to identify the way the drums appear written out. Because, you know, this has kind of been a big topic of debate, even with us at 180, is how important is reading, right? Because at the end of the day, there's lots of people who can speak English and can't read or write English. And in the real world, that's a little bit harder to function than it is in the musical world. You don't really have to know how to read or write drum music to survive in the music world. But I do think that if you can harness some of this and start here and learn it, It's going to help you guys build a better foundation. It's going to help you if you ever have an idea at the drum set and you're like, man, I want to remember that idea tomorrow. Have you ever had that happen already? Maybe you guys are playing some simple beats and you're like, what was that thing I was doing, right? When you can write stuff out, you can remember it. That's how we remember what happens in history, man.
Yeah.
So we write it out, right?
Yeah.
And we tell stories, which is more of like what we do with music. We record music. It's not always written out. But Beethoven stuff, it can be both be heard and be read. Yeah. And that's a couple different ways that we can store it. So
to be totally transparent, actually, I would say that probably half of the pros that we've had in here don't really know how to read that well. But all of those guys have said, I wish I knew how. Right?
Yeah, Dave couldn't be more right. Yeah, and I don't think, this is actually really important because I don't think being able to read makes you a better drummer. Because we've had some guys, like, just forget the guys even we've had in here. I've met drummers who don't know how to read that are better than drummers who know how to read. I know a lot of drummers, I can read better than a lot of drummers, and yet there's a lot of drummers that are way better than me. They can't read anything because drumming is still music. It's like speech, right? I could write beautifully, but if I can't speak beautifully, I mean, the whole goal here is to be able to speak the language of music, right? So Dave's totally right, is that it's not something that you have to know how to do. I think it's something that you'll wish, like you said, the pros, you'll wish you knew how to do, and now's the best time to start. So guys, that's a really good foundation for you to build off of. We've really taken a good amount of time here to lay a solid foundation for you guys. If you have questions, hit us up. Continue on with the series of going through understanding reading, understanding note values, because we're going to get into that as well. And the best thing I can encourage you guys to do, the best thing, is just take your time. Go slow. There's no rush. Like you said it, dude. It's like, this takes time.
Enjoy the journey, guys.
Enjoy the journey. All right, guys, we will see you in the next lesson.